want to read tonight. I want to read some scriptures out of Exodus. And about to get out of Exodus, so I know y'all proud of that. Probably like your Bible's just falling open to the second, third, fourth chapter of Exodus by now. But you know what? The main thing is we do something about it, right? What the Lord's telling us. Exodus 4. Let's just begin reading. We'll read 1 through 9, and then I want to read just a few more verses in that chapter, and then I'll back up and say a few things. Moses answered and said, "But behold, Lord, they will not believe me, nor hearken unto my voice, for they will say, The Lord hath not appeared to thee." And the Lord said unto him, "What is that in thine hand?" And he said, "A rod." And he said, "Cast it on the ground." And he cast it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses fled from before it. And the Lord said unto Moses, "Put forth thine hand, and take it by the tail." And he put forth his hand and caught it, and it became a rod in his hand. "That they may believe that the Lord God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and of Jacob, hath appeared unto thee." And the Lord said furthermore unto him, "Put now thine hand into thy bosom." And he put his hand into his bosom. And when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous as snow. And he said, "Put thine hand into thy bosom again." And he put his hand into his bosom again, and plucked it out of his bosom. And behold, it was turned again as his other flesh. "And it shall come to pass, that if they will not believe thee, nor hearken to the voice of the first sign, they will believe the voice of the latter sign. And it shall come to pass, if they will not believe also these two signs, neither hearken unto thy voice, that thou shalt take of the water of the river, and pour it upon the dry land, and the water which thou takest out of the river shall become blood upon the dry land." Now, many times you've probably heard that there was only two signs, but if you really, like one fella said, take your denominational glasses off and just read the Bible, the Lord will show you there was more than two signs there that he taught to Moses about at the burning bush. There was actually three signs. Let me just continue reading. Let's go to verse 27. "And the Lord said to Aaron, Go into the wilderness to meet Moses. And he went and met him in the mount of God and kissed him. And Moses told Aaron all the words of the Lord who had sent him, and all the signs which he had commanded him. And Moses and Aaron went and gathered together all the elders of the children of Israel. Aaron spake all the words which the Lord had spoken unto Moses, and did the signs in the sight of the people. And the people believed. And when they heard that the Lord had visited the children of Israel, and that he had looked upon their afflictions, then they bowed their heads and they worshiped." Now, if you look at verse 31, you'll begin to see something I said a few weeks ago, and I'm just going to back up and share a few things tonight. But God's greatest obstacle was getting his people to believe, to get his people to have confidence in him. All of this happened so that the people would rally around Moses and Aaron and believe, and then go stand before the enemy in confidence that God was visiting them, okay? So I just want you to just think of that just a moment. God's obstacle is not the enemy. You know, his workmanship is not, his work is not to make the enemy bow down and back up. His obstacle is getting us to believe him. Okay? Getting us in a place of confidence. So back when this thing started, again, we're still at the burning bush. Moses told the Lord they wouldn't believe, and then God asked Moses something right here. He said in verse 2, he said, "What is in your hand?" And I want to say something about this right here. Okay? He didn't say, let me kind of bring this up to where we live. He didn't say what's in the hand of the minister that you're following. Okay, there's a lot of people following ministries. And let me tell you something about that. A lot of people, and I'm just speaking the truth in love here. A lot of people will do anything a ministry tells them to do. Okay? And the danger of that is, first of all, God never told you to do that. And what if He didn't tell them to do that, and you're wasting kingdom time and energy on something that's just a passing fad? So I'm saying that to say this: we need to really learn the voice of God and really see the fruit, right, that's before us, just like the signs was, if you will, fruit. God asked Moses, what is in your hand? Okay? Not what is in somebody's hand you're following. What do you have that I've already give you or allowed you to carry in your possession? That's what I'll use. And he asked him kind of like this: what's in your hand right now? Not what are you planning on getting later, or, you know, you're planning on getting over some things in life and then getting in ministry. He's saying, what are you carrying right now that I can use right now? Okay? And that's important, because the enemy will cause us to waste time thinking that we've got to get to a certain level, get to a certain place, get a certain measure of righteousness, okay, before God uses us. But God came to Moses and He said, what is in your hand? And I'd like to say, right now. And Moses answered him and said, you know, I got this rod here, which is like most of us. I don't feel like I got anything God can use. I mean, most people live that way. And so God told Moses to lay it down, surrender what you have. You'd be surprised what we already are carrying that the Lord can use, right? And I would like to say the greatest thing I feel like everybody's carrying is a testimony, a story of what God has done in our lives. How long has it been since we've used our testimony? Okay? So, I got two people I want to bring out in this little thought right here. When Moses laid that rod down, it became a snake. And it's kind of like God was saying, let me get the snake out of it. Let me get the enemy out of it, his hands off from it, or the slither out of it. Okay? I thought about ML and Gary when I read this. And I thought about, I've seen pictures of them in the world before they got saved with guitars in their hands. And I wished all y'all could see these pictures. I mean, these two dudes, I'm serious about what I'm saying. I know it's humorous. But these two guys could play for any rock and roll group in America. I'm serious. I mean, I've heard them really jam. You know what I mean? I mean, I've heard them really play their guitars. And they could play with anybody. But God gave them that gift, that talent, as He gives skills or whatever to people for His kingdom. Sometimes we're carrying all we need. We just need to get the enemy out of it. We just need to lay it down and get the slither out of it. We need to give it to God and let Him sometimes even re-anoint it. Okay, because it was anointed when He gave it to us. Ephesians 1 and 4, remember that we were chosen before the foundation of the world. And if we kind of attach that to Jeremiah 1 and 5, God told Jeremiah, before you were in your mother's womb, I knew you and then I ordained you. I called you. In other words, I put a prophetic word in your mouth from the very beginning. Now, Jeremiah could have used that to do anything with it. He could have been an auctioneer. He could have been a politician. Okay? He had that gift, but he used it for God. And every one of us has got something in our hands or in our possession that we can use for the Lord. Everybody sitting in this church. I don't care who you are. Okay? And Moses had this, watch this. Moses had this before he had an encounter with God. Okay? He had it before he had an encounter. He just needs to realize what I've got, God gave me and wants me to use it for His glory. And that's where a lot of times, we live. So I thought I'd use Brother M.L. and Brother Gary because they don't have to be up here on Sunday. They do that for the Lord. They could be anywhere. And there's a lot of people that are out there in the world using what God gave them for His kingdom and His purpose for Him to be glorified. And a lot of them don't even realize that if they would just give that thing to God, He would take the enemy hands off from it, if you will, give it back to them, and it'd be on for the Lord. You see what I'm saying? Now, I'll show you something about that. Let's go to Exodus chapter 3 and verse 21. Just back up just a little bit. And I want to give you something right here. Exodus 3:21. This is when the children of Israel, God's prophesying that they're going to come out of Egypt, and we know this happened. He said, I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And it shall come to pass that when you go, you shall not go empty. But every woman shall borrow of her neighbor and of her that sojourneth in her house jewels of silver, jewels of gold, and raiment. And ye shall put them upon your sons and upon your daughters, and ye shall spoil the Egyptians. Now let me tell you something. God used wisdom right there, that when He, instead of them putting all that gold and silver and raiment in wagons and it being noticed, look how much they're getting, He scattered it out on the people. You ever thought about that? He scattered it out on the sons and daughters to where it looked like everybody just had a little bit. And really, when you get 2 or 3 million people coming out of Egypt and everybody's got gold on, and they get out there, they got a lot of gold. See? And a lot of silver. So the Lord's wise. He's really wise. Now, everybody in here knows, and if you don't know, I'll tell you. The reason God gave them this gold, this silver, and this raiment was that there was coming a day when they were going to get out in the wilderness and they was going to build a temple for the Lord with this gold, silver, and raiment. In other words, what God gave them in Egypt was for His kingdom, not for them. You know, some people say, I'm favored of God. I got the favor of God. Why have you got the favor of God? You got the favor of God because God allowed you to have something other people ain't got for Him. Not for you, for Him. Okay, we're gonna reap maximum benefits just being a part of this thing, but the gold, the silver, and the raiment was for when they got out in the wilderness and God got ready to build that tabernacle, they were going to have all the materials to build it with. Okay? And that's what it was for. And let me say it like this. It's not about who's got the big gold necklace and who's got the little earring or the little ring. Okay? Everybody's got something to contribute. See, the enemy wants somebody that's walking around with a little gold ring on to look at somebody over there with a big necklace and say, he wants to say, look, he's got more than you, and that's what he does in the church. But let me tell you something. It don't work that way with the Lord. Right? The favor that God gives us, the spoils, if you will, whatever God brought you out of Egypt with for His glory, that's all He requires of you. That's it. He don't require your testimony to match my testimony to match yours. He brought us out of 2 different places for His glory, right? And what happened to these people, to most of this gold and silver? What happened? When they got to Exodus 32, when Moses was up on the mountain, right, with God, and he delayed to come down, the people pressured Aaron. They pressured weak leadership, okay? And they said, up and make us a god, for this man Moses, we don't know where he's at, right? And Aaron, he caved to the pressure of the people. And he told them to bring all the gold and silver. And what they do, they melted it down and fashioned a golden calf with what they were supposed to build the temple of God with. How many people today are using their talents, their abilities, what God has given them, gold and silver, our finances, our treasures, our talents, our time, on stuff that don't matter, or an idol that's supposed to be advancing the kingdom of God, right? So think about that. God gave them this. God gave them that, and what did they do? They got out there and wasted it. A lot of them did. I ain't saying all of them did, but a lot of them wasted it on an idol. Wasted it on an idol. I'm going to say it again. Wasted it on an idol. Okay? Now, let's look at this just a minute. Let's go to Luke 21, and I want to back up and kind of hit on where I was just at for just a second, because I want everybody to feel as important as the next. Luke 21, and it's very familiar. Let me find 21. Verse 1. Jesus looked up and saw the rich men casting their gifts into the treasury. Okay? And he saw also a certain poor widow casting in thither 2 mites. And he said, of a truth I say unto you, that this poor widow hath cast in more than they all. For all these have of their abundance cast in unto the offerings of God, but she of her penury hath cast in all the living that she had. In other words, go back to the thought that God is not requiring you to measure up with anybody. He's looking that you bring to Him from the heart, from your heart, what He gave you to begin with. Okay? And a lot of times Paul teaches this to the Corinthians. It's not wise to compare yourself or measure yourself with somebody else. Okay? So don't ever let the enemy beat you up because your tithe or your offering or whatever you brought to God don't measure up to somebody else's. Because here's where he's looking at it differently from human amount. He's looking at it like from the heart. Okay? So when you read this little parable or this little teaching about this woman, I imagine these people were shocked because they were looking through natural eyes. Okay? They were looking, no, these rich men brought, didn't you see them putting all that gold in the, Jesus, that's not the way I'm looking at it. They got plenty of that. She don't have plenty. She gave out of what she wanted, needed, right? So I'm just wanting to say that to you because a lot of times when you look at this, let me tell you, let's look at the flip side of that. You know, when these people came and brought their gold to Aaron and started fashioning this golden calf, there were some people that probably felt like, well, if I just give this little bit into that, it won't matter. But that little bit does matter. If God gave you a talent, if He gave you a calling, if He gave you something to advance His kingdom, you want to give all of that to God. Okay? All of that. Whether you're called to teach, sing, preach, serve. You know, there's a gift of helps. How many of you know that? There's a gift in the Bible of helps. There's a ministry of helps. I don't know of anybody that don't need some help. Right? And there's a ministry of help. And a lot of times the enemy gets us platform blind. We think a ministry only has to operate on a platform. Okay? But I want you to know, whatever God gave you, don't let the enemy tell you, what you got don't matter. Because God's looking, okay, I gave you 1 talent. I gave you 5. I gave you 10. I'm only requiring 1 talent from who I gave 1 to. I'm only requiring 5. And we're not to measure and compare churches with churches, church members with church members. We're not to get caught up in that trap. But we're to take what God has given us and we're to invest it into His kingdom for His glory, right? So I said that just to show you that God only required what was in Moses' hand. And it was enough. It was enough. It was enough. Okay? Because we don't need much when God calls it forth. Okay? So let's look at John chapter 6, and I'll conclude with this little area in the Bible. Very familiar. And that's the thought tonight. What do you have in your hand? And whatever you have in your hand is enough. Okay? So let's read right here. Let's start reading with verse 5. John chapter 6. When Jesus lifted up his eyes and saw a great company coming to him, he said unto Philip, Whence shall we buy bread that these may eat? And this he said to prove him, for he himself knew what he would do. How about that? How about that? It's not like he's looking for an answer from us. He knows what he's going to do. He just wants to know, are you willing to step out? Are you willing to cooperate? Okay? This he said to prove him. Philip answered, 200 pennyworths of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may take a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said, There's a lad here which hath 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes. But what are they among so many? And Jesus said, Make the men sit down. There was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in number about 5,000. Jesus took the loaves. When he had given thanks, he distributed to the disciples, and the disciples to them that were set down, and likewise of the fishes as much as they would. And when they were filled, he said unto his disciples, Gather up the fragments that remain, that nothing be lost. And therefore they gathered them together and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of 5 barley loaves which remained, over and above unto them that had eaten. So, you got to just picture this this young man when he leaves from his mother's house that day with these few fishes and loaves. He probably, of course, has no idea. I mean, it's like us. We have no idea what the Lord wants to do that day. We have no idea. We just, we run up on people in life, and as we've been teaching a little bit lately, or in the last few weeks, the more sensitive you get, the more you start listening and looking for the Gershons and the broken people and the hurting people. Every day, it's like every day you'll run into somebody that's got a need. I mean, if you just go through life, doing your thing and busy, that word about makes us puke, right? And you just go through, you may not catch it, but if you get sensitive, I mean, everywhere you go, there's somebody that's hurting. There's somebody that needs something, right? And here's this young boy. He just like me and you, get up in the morning, get his lunch, head out, and Jesus has all this planned out, right? And this boy probably thinks just like you and I. What I got is, man, this ain't going to help nobody. I mean, this ain't going to help nobody. I mean, here's a situation he walks upon. 5,000 people here, roughly, besides the men and children. And just, what is this? How can I make a difference? How can I make an impact with what little bit that I have? See, that's the mental disqualifies us. In our hands, it's never going to make much of an impact. Holding on to it and reserving it won't never make any impact. But here's the thing. Number one, Andrew said, there's a lad here. Okay? That's the first thing. You got to be here. I mean, you got to show up wherever. I'm not just talking about church. You have to show up on the scene where the Lord wants to do something. Okay? And he was there. And look, you're here. You're going to be here Sunday. Usually people that's here on Wednesday nights, they're here on Sunday. All right? Y'all heard that, didn't you? And what can we do Sunday? Being we're here, what can we do to bring something to the Lord, to give something that we have to the Lord, that He can take it and bless somebody else? Right? Now, let me tell you something about this little old lunch. This little old lunch was something this boy wanted. It's easy to give the Lord something you don't want. But this little old lunch, this is his lunch. I mean, hey, this is something he wanted. And I find out the greater the sacrifice, the more anointing that comes on it. Okay? So when he gave this little bit, insignificant thing he feels like, and that's the way all of us feel. I mean, we don't usually walk up in here on Sunday morning like, hey, I'm ready to whip everybody's problem, right? I mean, usually we just come up in here, we're human, we're normal. Sometimes we feel more spiritual than others, but hey, it's not like we're hunting a Goliath for everybody, right? But I'm going to tell you, everybody's carrying something. Everybody's carrying something that needs to make a transfer from us to the Lord. And then if we'll make that transfer, He'll make it from Him to them. Every time. Every time. He'll do it. So this little boy gives us lunch up, right? You don't get to read the rest of this story. We don't have anything to read about this. I know the disciples. Here's the disciples. They, you know the story. They took the fishes and loaves and started, and the Lord began to multiply. Okay? Just imagine you're that little boy standing there. Just imagine. Mama ain't never gonna believe this. I mean, really. I mean, she packed my lunch this morning. And he's standing there. He just comes home and he says, Mama, I ain't even gonna tell you. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. You wouldn't believe what the Lord done with what little bit I had. I want to say something to us tonight, and I'm about done, but listen. You won't believe what the Lord will do with what little bit you'll offer Him, if you'll offer it to Him. I'm telling you. Just here's the best thing you can do, is to give Him some of your time. Start out with that. Okay? Brother Jamie, I'm not anointed, I'm not this or that. Start just giving Him some of your time. Okay? You start doing that and see what the Lord will do. Okay? For people that don't have we're stumped in the church thinking a calling is preaching and singing. We think that's all it is preaching and singing. Let me tell you, there's no greater reward than one-on-one helping somebody, ministering to somebody. and reaching out to somebody. So let me tell you, Jesus said this, when you've done it unto the least of one of these, it says you've done it unto me. So when you go out there and you minister to somebody and give somebody some little something, whether it's a word of encouragement or whether it's some kind of deed that the Lord lays upon your heart to give somebody something, whatever, it's no different than you took that boy's lunch that he had. It's no different than you give it to Jesus when you give it to them. I'm telling you. Because when you release is when He brings increase. When we release, God brings increase. Okay? So remember that. God told Moses, He said, what's in your hand? What have you had in your hand way before you ever had an encounter with me? I guarantee you that God didn't look at my life one day and say, you know what? I'm going to call him to preach. No, He called me to preach from my mother's womb. We just didn't know it. Mama didn't know it for sure. It's a wonder Mama didn't say, come here and sit down. Are you sure? Are you sure? Brother Gene, you know what? I preached on you last Wednesday night. You didn't know it, did you, brother? Should have been live streaming. Yeah. So, see, the Lord don't, Ephesians 1:4. What you've been carrying for years. Moses has been carrying that old rod for I don't know how many years. He worked for Jethro 40 years, 40-ish years. And there's no tellings how long he had been carrying what God had been wanting to use for years. Okay? Now just think about this big old blank, I'm closing, big old blank gap in the Bible. You're turning John chapter 5, John chapter 6, blank page. John chapter 7, words again. Why is John chapter 6 blank? Because there was a little boy that walked upon a hill one day and Jesus asked him for his lunch and he wouldn't give it to him. He wouldn't give it to him. But because he did give it to him, we have this story. And because you do give what God's give you, and you've been carrying for years, you decide, you know what? Hey, I need to step out of the boat. Time ain't waiting on me, right? I need to step out of the boat here and do something for the Lord. And you do what God has called you to do, whatever that is. You create a story for every generation to hear about. Right? Brother Gene, I shared that story about you coming looking in that little window at the little church on the side of the river and nowhere to sit but the front. And brother, I carry that story. I carry that testimony. And I carry a lot of testimonies. And it's fuel for me. It's fuel for me. Sister Karen, I throwed you in there on a couple things. I just want to honor you there. But it was good. It was all good. But church, I'm going to close on this. Listen, whatever you've been carrying since you were born, okay? Whatever it is, don't let the enemy have it. Don't let the enemy use it for his honor and glory and rob God of what God gave you. Because Brother Emil could be somewhere in the world right now. He could. I'm telling you, you ain't heard this guy play a guitar yet. Some of you have. But I'm just telling you, him and Brother Gary could do that. But they choose to do it for the Lord. Okay? And it creates a story for lives to give hope. Everybody good? Anybody want to make a comment?
About the 12 baskets that was left over.
12 disciples.
What did they do how, that's what I was thinking. I said, they might have sent it back home with that little boy, and who knows what blessing that brought, because we didn't know his background. Did they have feed? Was that the last thing that mother sent out the door for him? You know what I'm saying?
Yep, there's a lot of good imaginations there, sister. It really is. That's kind of the way I am when I read the Bible. I just kind of imagine a lot, let the Lord just fill in the blanks. But, it's been said, we think, we don't know, because it ain't thus saith the Lord. It's been said that because the disciples served the people, that they got a basket full over and beyond, above. That's just a good thought. Like preachers say, that'll preach, But we don't know. I mean, good point, Sister Wanda. God might have put them 12 on a wagon, sent them back to the house, or got the disciples and told them back to the boy's house, showed his mama, said, hey, look at here what God done through one blessing. We don't know, but that is a good point. But we do know that everybody was satisfied, everybody was blessed, and there was plenty left over. And that's kingdom talk because of one sacrifice. Okay? That's a good point.